This program is proudly brought to you by Daytech Limited and the National Information and Communications Technology Authority. In this edition of Infocus, we feature discussions on some of the major topics and themes that will be covered at the LAWASIA Environmental Law Conference 2026 to be held in Port Moresby. In our first interview, we are joined by Justice John Carey and later on by Justice Derek Wood. Justice John Carey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, firstly, Justice John Carey, could you give us a background of LAWASIA?
LAWASIA is an organization that involves judges, lawyers, academics, jurists. It's an association that promotes rule of law, that has worked with Asia and Pacific Island countries since 1966 to promote various issues related to law and justice, and generally areas that cover climate change, environment, digital governance, quite an array of areas. That's really what LAWASIA is about.
Now, I understand you'll be hosting the next LAWASIA Environmental Law Conference 2026, which is scheduled for the 19th to the 21st of August 2026 in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. What should we expect to see?
I think we're going to have quite a bit of international experts from the environmental space. Specifically, I know we expect the Chief Justice of Brazil, who will be here. He's a world leader in environmental discussions with indigenous people in Brazil. We will have a lot of academics, we'll have lawyers and environmental experts who will share their ideas and concepts on environment and how we can, in PNG, improve in preservation of the environment for generations of Papua New Guineans to come and the Pacific Islands generally.
Now, I understand there are some major legal issues LAWASIA will be looking to address this year. Why was it timely to look at those issues?
Well, when we look at what's happening around the world with climate change and the fact that there are many people that I know personally who don't believe in climate change, particularly people like me and maybe like yourself. We grew up as Christians, and we some of us have this view that the Lord doesn't allow change to happen. But the fact is that the evidence, empirical evidence, is that the temperature has risen in my lifetime. And I remember growing up in an island where the water level used to be very low compared to the dock when I stood out by the boats. Now the water level is at the same level as the dock. That means that climate change has affected the environment. So for LAWASIA and for PNG in particular, this is timely for us to talk about the environment and what we can do to preserve our environment for successive generations.
Now, Justice Carey, furthermore, we are witnessing somewhat of a shift or deviation away from the environmental, social governance, or ESG standards. A notable example would be the US administration under President Trump. Are you concerned with this trend?
Not necessarily. One thing that we do know is that public policy comes and goes based on who holds policy decision making. In terms of the realities, the LAWASIA has been focused on educating our partners and persons around the LAWASIA area on how we can improve in the environment, how we can improve in social governance, and that focus will continue to remain regardless of the policymakers that come and go, whether it's in North America, whether it's in Asia, whether it's Pacific Islands. The focus is on how we can preserve our environment.
Now, in terms of the resources sector, what would you say are the main challenges surrounding extractive industry conflicts and disputes within the region?
Well, if I look right here in PNG, we have a lot of issues with land rights. We have issues with climate change litigation. We have issues with the environmental damage by extractive industries, and that affects ordinary people. And so this conference gives the opportunity for discussions in that area, and extractive industries where there's an opportunity to engage with stakeholders on how we can improve the environment, how we can preserve the environment for the indigenous people which are the majority of Papua New Guineans. They're indigenous people, and they have a right to expect to have access to their land free and unfettered from damage from any investor in this country.
Now, in your opinion, do legal systems within the region adequately recognize and protect indigenous people?
Generally, the challenge is that the statutory requirements sometimes don't meet customary realities. So, for example, you may have a law that's passed in Parliament that does not match up with the reality of how custom operates on the ground. So, that's an example where the courts have to look at how we can bridge the gap through the application of law. And generally around the world, I find that the indigenous peoples have not been properly preserved and protected. We look right next door neighbors to the south, where there's been challenges with land issues, with recognition of the indigenous people as being there before the formation of a country itself. So I think there's opportunity to improve in indigenous rights. Generally, we're moving in the right direction, but there's much more work that can be done.
What would you say would be a step in the right direction?
Well, in terms of Pacific and not specifically just PNG, ensuring that legislation matches the expectation of customary landowners, and that's through dialogue, because oftentimes people aren't even aware of laws that are passed and how it affects them. And I think that's one way to do it. And certainly the court user forum, where we have judges who do explain a lot to our people around the country on what can be done, what their rights are, because they also understand and must understand they have rights, and the courts are here to protect and preserve the rights of all people in Papua New Guinea.
Now, given the current geopolitical tensions, particularly in the Middle East, in your opinion, how would rapid geopolitical shifts and trade dynamics change legal priorities for the region?
Well, we still have to look at sustainability. Obviously, the sustainability aspect of life in PNG and the Pacific is paramount. If we're not here alive, life doesn't exist for us. And so what happens with regard to the realities of Middle East or anywhere else, it has impact here, but ultimately PNG is one of those countries that has been able to survive for thousands of years through their own ingenuity. And I think that still exists. The people of Papua New Guinea are able to sustain themselves exclusive if they had to, and they adapt. And I think the environmental conference gives people here an opportunity to have dialogue and discussions on ways you can use the environment to benefit your livelihood and success, but also preserve your environment at the same time. So you don't just burn down a tree and not replant the tree so that you have a tree for the next generation to benefit from. That's just a simple example. There has to be sustainability. And so I think regardless of those geopolitical issues, the fact is that people here are proven that they can survive and withstand whatever happens internationally.
Now, given the rapid technological transformation currently coming into the world, what does law in the digital era mean to you, and especially given the prevalence of crimes committed through digital technology or platforms?
Well, we have cybercrime, the Cybercrime Act, but we also know that a lot of crimes today are happening through the internet. So you have phishing, you have scams that people are taking advantage of, especially elderly and vulnerable, who believe that sometimes these emails come in and say you spend one kina and you get 10,000, and they fall prey by giving up their bank accounts. That's just bank account information. That's just an example. I think we recognize that these challenges exist also with the advent of artificial intelligence and being able to use technology for good. In PNG, I think the general view is that technology is good for us. It's how do we safeguard the people here so that they are benefiting from the technology and not adversely taken advantage of. And I think the courts have been very, very helpful in terms of enforcing the law to protect people who have been taken advantage of when it comes to cyber crimes. We certainly have electronic evidence and the ability to take evidence in making decisions in the courts. So I think overall with the online aspect, the courts have that aspect covered in being able to assist persons whose rights are being infringed.
Now, finally, what would be your call to the public regarding the LAWASIA Environmental Law Conference?
I would encourage everybody to come to the LAWASIA Environmental Conference if you have an opportunity. It'll be a chance where you can encourage, have discussion, feel free and open to have dialogue with judges, with lawyers, with environmental experts, with international and local experts on anything related to the environment so that you can help to improve your quality of life wherever you are, whether you're in Tari, whether you're in Millen Bay, whether you're in Manus, whether you're in Daru. The opportunity is there for everybody to come to this conference.
Justice John Kerry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In our second interview, we are joined by Justice Derek Wood. Judge Derek Wood, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Now, firstly, Judge Wood, the LAWASIA Environmental Law Conference 2026 is centered around the theme, the environmental rule of law, what it is, how it is implemented, its threats, its institutions, and how it can be upheld. Why is it timely to have such conversations around this theme?
Yes, it's very timely for this to occur, and the conference will be occurring on the 19th, 20th and 21st at APEC House in Port Moresby. We're going to be having quite a few experts coming from the Asia-Pacific region and other parts of the world. We're going to be having a large number of people coming from around Papua New Guinea, including judges, magistrates, academics, and other experts in their field. And it's a timely reminder for everyone to get together to discuss these issues. For myself, as an example, growing up in the 70s, for a lot of us, environmental law issues, global warming, those issues were an issue that we didn't even think about, or if we did, they were a concept that were a long way away. But we've now come to that crossroads effectively where governments, all sorts of environmental agencies, we as a global community, we all need to make a difference and take it seriously. If we think about rising sea levels, if we think about the increase in the Earth's temperatures, we can look at this in practical terms in terms of people around Papua New Guinea being affected. One only has to fly to Kavieng and look at the low-lying islands in that area and know that over time a lot of these communities are losing their islands, they're losing their land. If we take it to another area such as the small country of Tuvalu, which has a population of about 10 to 11,000 people, the average height of Tuvalu is only 2 metres above sea level. And many of those residents are making application to be removed to Australia, to live there permanently. So it has a real long-lasting effect on communities. It's a real issue. And so we need to take these issues seriously. We now have a world population of some 8.3 billion people. That population is putting extreme pressure on the earth. And if we look at it for things such as pollution, environmental pollution, how do we dispose of our waste and garbage? Many countries are dealing with that issue in part by recycling. But if we don't have proper means of recycling, for example, then a lot of that waste that you and I and others consume, it simply goes into the ground. It goes into the ground, it's buried, it has an impact in terms of manufacturing or producing methane gases. It may affect the aquifers, which are the underlying water tables. So it has a whole range of things. If we look at around us in Port Moresby, unfortunately, there are areas where you might go to the harbour here or Koki, or more recently I was at Tutu Beach, or you go to, say, Aroma Coast, where I was a few years ago. You can walk along the beach and you'll see, unfortunately, a lot of rubbish. And as a community, we need to do more about it. Another example would be how it affects our sea life. Dolphins, turtles are becoming entrapped in netting, in plastic. They're consuming plastic. And even if we don't see the obvious effects, many fish are now consuming microplastics. So these are all sorts of examples, and I've only named a few, where it's really time that we deal with this issue because it's never going to go away.
Now, you touched on Tuvalu and the broader Pacific region.
Yeah.
It's a good segue into my next question. It's around, in what ways can regional and international agreements be better incorporated into domestic laws to ensure consistency across jurisdictions?
Yes, that is a very good question. And so when we have international treaties, obligations, agreements, one of the benefits of that is that whether it be Papua New Guinea or any other government, it really encourages those governments to look at their legislation carefully so that, well, hopefully where we can, and not always the case, laws are drafted to reflect universal standards, but obviously every law in a different country needs to take into account the local situation. But it's very important that we take a lot of those principles and standards from international treaties and obligations and agreements, and where we can, and if it's appropriate, that they're reflected in local legislation. And so, for example, we have a very wide resource sector in PNG. If we look at, for example, at mining, LNG, logging, large-scale fishing, it's important that we have robust laws that can be enforced. For example, if we look at mining, if you have a mine site, with that comes a whole range of issues. It might be the disposal of tailings, maintaining the quality of the water, maintaining the quality of safety at site. It might mean relocation of people who live on the land, if it's on a mining tenement. You have to factor in a whole range of community relations issues, including, if it was a mining company, special mining lease, maybe a compensation agreement for large amounts of people. If it was oil palm, for example, you're talking about deforestation and replacing it with large tracts of oil palm. That has effect on the local community, on the wildlife, even carbon renewal. And so it's important that those laws are robust to deal with a whole range of compliance issues, not only for companies to ensure that they're complying with the law, but to ensure that there are robust reporting requirements, and if companies don't report as required, that they're taken to task by the regulators.
Now, finally, Judge Wood, given the global green transition, how can the legal profession assist in balancing national economic development goals against the urgent need for a transition to renewable energy under the current international environmental laws?
Yes. Well, the legal profession has a big part to play in that. And if we break it down, state lawyers have a very important job. State lawyers being those at the State Solicitor's Office, and sometimes with necessary advice from other experts, they have a very important job to make sure that the legislation which is being drafted is drafted properly to accommodate whatever the situation might be on the ground, and that the legislation is very clear and not ambiguous. So they have a role in firstly drafting effective legislation to be put before Parliament, ensuring that any regulations that might come afterwards are also well drafted. Then we have this very important role of lawyers, not only in the private and the public sector, ensuring that they provide the correct legal advice to their clients. And so from my position, if I have a lawyer coming to court, I really need the confidence to know that that person, if it's a resources issue, is that they're properly skilled in that area of the law. There's nothing worse than knowing that a lawyer, for example, is providing the incorrect legal advice, or they're not really sure about what they're saying. So it's really important that lawyers are properly trained, that lawyers, if they're lacking a skill set, that they get further assistance from colleagues, or they do further training. So it's important that lawyers give the correct legal advice. It's also important for lawyers to remember that when they're coming to the court, and often people tend to forget this, and often the general public won't know this, but lawyers actually have a higher duty to the court not their client, in terms of putting all relevant matters before the court. So if I give you one example, if a party comes to court, and again we'll use the situation of landowners, they might be arguing about the receipt of royalties and who are the authorised representatives. It would be important that if a party comes to court with their lawyer and they're seeking various orders or declarations from the court, that the party didn't attempt to exclude other parties involved in that dispute from coming to court. What I mean by that in real terms is commencing a proceeding and not naming an interested party as a defendant, because that this might be a dispute that's some several hundred kilometres away. It might be up in a regional area, and to exclude a party that might be involved in the proceeding would be, in most cases, improper. And so that's a reminder to the lawyers that even if they might be receiving some pressure from their clients to not name certain parties, lawyers remembering that they have a higher duty to the court to inform the court of all relevant matters and put all relevant matters before the court.
Judge Derek Wood, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, viewers, that ends this episode of In Focus. Do join us again next week, Monday, on our regular time slot of 7 p.m. Till then, bye for now. This program was proudly brought to you by Daytech Limited and the National Information and Communications Technology Authority.